Welcome to this Grow My SME webinar. This is part of a series of products that are provided and services that are provided by the Growth Hub to help advance businesses in the Humber area, and there's lots of different services that they're rolling out to do this, with a particular focus on developing digital capabilities and using digital to advance the business, advance your business and in various different ways. And so they roll these out on all different topics, and we try and just provide a little bit of insight into various areas of business with, as I say, with a particular focus on digital. So that's kind of where we're at today. And what we're going to be talking about. So developing standout products and services using digital. And particularly prevalent point, really, it's particularly at the time that we're in, and as we're emerging out of this awful year that we've been in, the ability for businesses to be able to advance and move forward and think about what their offer is and where it's relevant, where are they continuing to add value to, as we move forward and things change. And in doing so, are you developing new services and new products and new capabilities? And that's kind of what we're going to touch upon today, and try and give just a general overview about how you might look and explore how to do this. Some of this stuff, if you've been in attendance to our events before, you may already know, or you may have heard us talk about. Some of it might be new. I do welcome you to chat to us throughout, or if you're feeling brave, turn on your cameras and your mics and you want to talk to us, that would be really great. I'm not a massive fan of death by webinar, you know, so as interactive as we can make it, then that's always great. So feel free to ask questions and we'll try and field these as we go. So just a little bit of background. So we are a Dennett Group. So myself and Rob are both partners at Dennett Group, which is an innovation consultancy. And we work with brands and organizations all around the world, helping them develop their innovation strategy, thinking about new products, new services, the way that their business is structured, and helping them to just think differently about what their offer is and make sure that it's continually evolving. And as I say, continuing to add value to their consumer and functioning in the best way. And are these businesses leveraging the capabilities that come with digital technology to make sure that they're able to do that? That's kind of our role here as a Dennett Group, and hopefully some of that stuff we're going to be able to talk about today. So up to the first point, and really getting into the foundation of stuff really, before we get into products and services. As I say, we're an innovation consultancy, and I guess the first question in there is, why innovate? This is one of those kind of buzzwords that you'll hear a lot, and every man and his dog's involved in innovation or transformation or whatever else. And it's a very open question, really. But just before I move on, if anybody wanted to drop a note in the comments or in the chat, just your answer to this, you know, why should businesses innovate? It'd be really interesting just to hear your thoughts on that just before I move to the next slide, if anybody would like to ask. Well, I'll try and stimulate it while we're going through there. So what is innovation? Well, you know, innovation is a grand term, as I say, and you can see there the image of the man on the moon. And that's probably what people are thinking of when they think about innovation, particularly smaller businesses. You know, landing on the moon, developing an antibiotic, plane flights, you know, that kind of stuff sounds really grand and really bold, and that's kind of where most people would maybe define innovation. But actually innovation takes all sorts of forms, and it can be the smallest, tiniest little tweak that can just change the way that you do what it is that you do. Sorry, are people not able to see the slides? Can you just confirm? Can everyone see what I've got on screen?
I think that Catherine now can.
Right, okay, great, fantastic. Yeah, so you know, it could be man on the moon and buy antibiotics and all that kind of stuff. But if that's all that innovation was, innovation wouldn't happen very often, because these are kind of once in a generation movement. You know, the development of the internet, that kind of stuff. So the way that we define it particularly in a commercial sense, is translating an idea into a product or service that has value for which a consumer will pay. And that's ultimately how we look at innovation from a commercial point of view. And when we say a product or service, you know, that can mean a number of different things. That doesn't mean specifically always something on the shelf in Tesco. A product or service can be any form of offer that you provide that adds value to your consumer. And value, you know, obviously we immediately think of finance when we think of value and making money, which is one part of it. But value could be also in numerous different ways. That could be in brand recognition and reputation. It could be about being an authoritative voice of a sector. Value could be in the collection of data, you know, and so on, you know. So when we talk about this stuff, it's not always just about the tangible in terms of products, services, and making money and selling stuff. It's about having an impact and being able to provide a valuable offer to the user at the end of it. So you probably recognize this chap on the screen, Mr. Bezos, Jeff Bezos, who heads up Amazon or founded Amazon, and some of the devices you'll see on there are probably things that you've got in your living room or your workplace as we speak. You know, a whole ecosystem of new home automation products and voice controlled devices. But really this stuff is a development and a thought process of innovation that came from, you know, the want to be bold and try things out and create things before people knew that they wanted it. So obviously we know Amazon, for example, as a site where you can go and just buy lots of stuff and pretty much a staple of all our retail journeys now. But actually this stuff that we've got on here where they're really integrating everything into our homes is something that was thought about, you know, way back when. And he had this interesting point here that he says, you know, when he's talking about the home devices, the Echo, etc. And, you know, if you'd have gone to a customer in 2013 and said, you know, there's this always on Pringles-like cylinder thing that you can put in your kitchen that'll play music and tell you what the weather is and stuff like that. If you'd have offered that to people, most people would have probably said, no, thank you, because it just would have seemed beyond this world and beyond something that anybody would have thought would have been useful. But actually, you know, now it's, as I say, part of our everyday lives and something that we're using for shopping, for home automation, for our daily lifestyles, integrations into our watches, etc., etc. You know, so this approach to innovation and being bold and trying things well in advance before it was a known thing, you know, a proactive approach to it and provoking the business is really what's enabled Amazon to be who they are today and why this man's got far more money than any of us can ever imagine. But it's not just about growth. Innovation is also about resilience and survival. And you'll see some of the famous logos on the screen there. Blockbuster Video, Comet, MySpace, Kodak. You know, these, we could have listed thousands on here, but these are just some good examples of businesses that are no longer around, the brands that are no longer around because essentially there wasn't provoking the business. They was very successful in what they were doing, and they had their burst of success and, you know, in some cases staples of our high street, but really didn't shift and didn't pivot and really didn't provoke their business and try and develop it into doing something more. You know, they were doing so well in what they were doing that they kind of missed the boat of what was happening outside of their world. And as a result, they're no longer with us. And we see lots and lots of examples of this all the time. It's happening in every sector you can imagine. So the fundamentals of innovation. So let's talk about these foundations first of all. So we have a thing called the 3Ds at Adenic Group, which come of be disruptive, embrace digital, and think differently. And these 3Ds are really the fundamental assets really you need to ensure that your organization is always thinking innovatively, is always provoking the business, and always challenging the norm. So if we break these down a little bit, so the first one, be disruptive. So this is about, disruptive is a word you'll hear all the time, as I said earlier on. It's a bit of a buzzword that's floating around, and, you know, it can often just kind of sound a little bit fluffy, but actually it's very relevant. And it's really about moving forward and continuously innovating your product offer to defend against disruption. And those last logos that I had on the screen are a prime example of that. So it's about being ambitious. It's knowing your market and consumer. Nobody knows your business, your consumer more than you do. And so being able to keep close to them and move your innovation in line with what they want, continuously to add value. And we've said at the end there, disrupt yourself. And again, it comes back to that term, provoking the business, making sure that you're continuously provoking the business and asking yourself, are we still adding value? Is what we do in line with what people are wanting? This man here, Clayton Christensen, really is the person who defined that term, disruptive innovation. He was a Harvard business professor. And when he talked about it, when he was talking about disruption, he was talking about how new companies would come in at the base of an industry or base of a sector, and very, very much in early adoption of legacy sectors, and then they would quickly work their way up through the sector and eventually disrupt the incumbents. And they would do that by continuously exploring and evolving the offer and being able to be agile and move about. And change the way that things are done in a particular sector. So whilst the big famous brands that were in that sector are making lots of money, like your Toys R Us or your Blockbuster or whatever it might be, were busy retaining their market share or trying to retain their market share, these new upstarts would come up with not really a lot to lose, and they would provoke it and they would challenge it and then work their way up through the sector and eventually displace the people that were there. And that's essentially what disruption is all about. And as I say, we've seen lots of examples of it, which we'll come to later on as we go. This is highlighted quite nicely in these stats here from by Innersight. And what this graph shows here really is the rolling 7-year average lifespan of an organization, ranging from back in sort of 1965 and moving all the way into the future to 2030. And this is taken from the S&P 500 index in the US. And what it shows is there's a general trend line of going down in terms of lifespans of organizations. So back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you had those really long-standing legacy companies that would continue to evolve and be around for years and years and years, dominate the market. Typically big fuel companies and those that were in the tobacco industry, the car industry, that kind of stuff. But as you can see, as time's moved on, the lifespan of these companies is reducing and getting lower and lower in terms of how long they're around for. And that's because new businesses are coming in and disrupting those sectors. So, that kind of will be around forever and we're okay approach has really changed and is really moving quite rapidly. And as you see, as we move more into the future and as things evolve, particularly technologically, those lifespans are getting shorter. And we can see that in this little quote here that says half of the S&P 500 companies will be replaced over the next 10 years, many by companies which are yet to exist. And this is a really interesting point, because if we was to look back over the last 10 or 15 years, we can see that the companies that really dominate our lifestyles now and the way that we live and the services we use and all of that stuff, actually, many of them didn't exist even 10, 12, 15 years ago. There were new companies that rapidly displaced and disrupted those legacy brands. And that's happening more and more. So you can't really rest on your laurels, I guess is the point here. And some very famous examples of this. We always kind of make reference to the famous examples because, we all know who they are, but it's worth just touching upon them just to give context. So we think about the hospitality industry, then Airbnb is a great example of that, essentially a startup with a couple of college guys that set up airbeds and breakfast in a room to facilitate people being able to stay places. And that's just grown and grown and grown. Not a particularly unique idea as such, or something that's like mind-blowing. It's more about the ability to see the opportunity, see the frustrations that come with the hotel industry and being able to book rooms and accessibility and price and cost and all that kind of stuff, and being able to provide an alternative to that and allowing people to use their own spaces, whether that's their houses or, spare rooms or whatever it might be, to fulfill that need. And that's just grown and grown and grown, and you know, the rest is history. Another one, you can taxi, so you can see what's coming here. Uber, another great idea, not particularly novel. The technology already existed, you know, smartphones, GPS, looking at a problem in terms of accessing taxi cabs and all the things that come with that. Who, you know, can I get a taxi? How do I pay for it? Where is the taxi? Is the driver? You know, all of the usual stuff that we deal with. You know, just seeing an opportunity and then rolling it out. Again, the infrastructure they don't really need. All they needed to do is provide the platform and then allow people who have cars to facilitate that service. Again, you know, that really could be developed by anybody in a back room somewhere with a laptop. But really the difference here is the ability, desire to think differently and push those things out. And one of the old favorites, of course, Blockbuster Video. You know, a massive staple of the high street. I had a job there when I was a kid. I loved Blockbuster Video. It was really an event that you did with families. On a Friday night, you would go pick a film, pick some popcorn and sweets and all that kind of stuff. And it was part of our lifestyles. But again, you know, times moved on. And as we started to get into the world of subscription services, firstly subscribing to DVDs to be delivered, but then next into sort of streaming and having film on demand, the need for such infrastructure and their service as a whole massively reduced quite quickly. And of course, that leads to things like another staple of ours, which is Netflix. And this last year, Netflix has worked pretty hard, I'm pretty sure, because everybody's indulged in it quite a lot. What was interesting about this actually is Blockbuster Video had the opportunity to purchase Netflix in its early days and opted not to. And really missed the trick there because, again, they were so focused on what they had. You know, they had something like 9,000 stores around the world. You know, they were a staple of home entertainment. And so for them to pivot away from that was, you know, whether it was beyond they knew about it but didn't really want to do it, or, you know, they felt it was too risky, or they felt it was a fad, or whatever the case might be. At the end of the day, they missed the boat, and the rest is history. Within a couple of years, the thing that we know as Blockbuster was no longer there. So this stuff is happening. Same and just coming on from home entertainment into the cinema world as well. Now, if you look at, for example, if you look at the recent kind of Golden Globes or the Oscars or those big award ceremonies, a lot of the stuff that's out there now is really stuff that's going out on streaming platforms, and people are watching box sets and things that on-demand TV over really those big blockbuster movies that we really looked forward to going to see when it was release day. It does still happen, but very, very much reduced. And so, for example, the cinema world, in this case, Regal Cinemas, really had to explore what their offer was beyond a film, you know, and those big blockbuster releases, and actually creating more of an experience and exploring, you know, restaurant dining, luxury seating, alcohol, and like a subscription service, which was a key business model change for them, where you would pay so much over a year and be able to see as many films as you wanted, you know, so a different model to being able to do per ticket, per film, previous model that they had. You know, so everybody's essentially had to react and think differently to what's going on in those industries. So that's a little bit about disruption, just some foundation there. Embrace digital. Key word to note on here is embrace rather than be digital. And it's important to note this because it doesn't, just making everything digital doesn't make it better. If you've got a bad process or a bad system, and it doesn't really add value, by making it digital, it doesn't make it better. It's still a bad system. It's just now a bad digital system. So where you are embracing digital technology, it needs to be adding value. That being said, digital really is the catalyst behind pretty much most disruption that's happened in the last sort of 15, 20 years and continues to advance exponentially. So by not embracing it, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot a little bit. But when we say embrace digital, it needs to be where it makes sense and where it offers meaningful benefits. Technology does provide great opportunity. It allows the opportunity to be disruptive, and those examples of Uber and Airbnb are very big examples, but digital is the thing that's facilitated and enabled them to challenge what is a global infrastructure and a global marketplace with very little infrastructure. And technology is advancing all the time, and we'll touch upon this a little bit later, and it's moving rapidly, and essentially innovators really need to plug into it. So just on the basics, when we say digital, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the use of physical technology, often referred to as hardware, or virtual technology, often referred to as software, to aid in a function or operation. And that might be outward reaching in terms of direct to consumer and providing a digital service or product to them to access, or it might be internal, you know, operationally in terms of the way the business is structured or the way you market, et cetera, et cetera. So it takes all different forms. And looking at what that looks like in kind of the role that digital has played in the commercial landscape. So the image on the screen would be a typical legacy company environment. You know, lots of infrastructure, lots of desks, lots of people, and then all of this stuff in place to enable a business to continue to function and run and make money and maintain its market share. Yeah, large workforces, large amounts of capital investment. And, you know, again, this last year has really highlighted how much this can really be pivoted, you know, with everybody working from home, and, you know, a lot of these skyscrapers and big infrastructures actually not having anybody in them, you know, so the last year has actually forced businesses to pivot to some extent, to a large extent, in fact. But what does it look like today? Well, you can do a lot of that stuff from a home, from a laptop, with all the applications and all the access to tech that we have now and all the different API integrations and all the things that we have access to. It means a lot of that infrastructure is just not needed anymore, because we're able to do a lot of jobs quite quickly and efficiently using the tech that's available to us. Reducing costs, of course, that comes with that. You know, if the less infrastructure you have, the less money that you need to spend on it. Automation and digital, it removes the needs for massive workforces. Decentralized team, again, as I was saying, remote working, this has become far more prevalent now. And competitors and threats which can be hidden and they can grow more quickly. And those examples of Uber and Airbnb and all those other ones are good examples of that. Competitors that can come into the marketplace and really disrupt it with little or no presence, almost appear from nowhere to some extent. And then it starts to advance into sort of more elaborate opportunities that come with the digital technology, and we're really getting into that world now. So the little funny figure that you've got on the screen at the moment is from Google DeepMind. And this is all really based around machine learning. And actually the capability that machines have now and are gaining. So this example here was the machine was given the challenge of this humanoid figure, making it get from point A to point B in the most efficient way possible. And if you imagine this in comparison to a human being and how long it takes for a human to learn to walk and master the art of getting from A to B, you know, it's maybe from when we're born, maybe a year into our lives before we really understand how to move about. This machine did it in 3 hours, and it did it itself. It's self-learning, you know, so you give them, okay, this is the task, take this humanoid figure and I want you to get from A to B, get around these obstacles, how would you do it? And essentially it taught itself to walk. And this is, you know, a funny example, I guess, but the point being is the capability of machines and technology is advancing at such a rapid pace. And you can imagine what this could be applied to in the commercial landscape in all sorts of different areas, and is being applied to. So I can just see my chat bot going a lot. I'm just aware, is somebody on that? Oh, Rob, you're on it, it's fine. So then in terms of technology, so technology will never move as slowly as it does today. And ain't that the truth? You know, it really is moving at a rapid rate, and we need to be tuning into it if you're not to be left behind. So this graph on the screen here is from a company called theemergingfuture.com, which I highly recommend you go and check out, because they really explore all of this stuff and give some really good insight into what is happening in the technology world and how that's affecting things. And what this shows is actually in the next 5 years, our technological ability is going to be advancing massively. So in the next 5 years, we'll be 32 times more technologically advanced. But as we move on through that, in the next 10 years, they predict will be 1,000 times more advanced. And then even further from that, in the next 20 years, will be 1,000,000 times more advanced. So you can see there's a vast spike rising there in terms of how quickly technology is moving. And the point here is that every technological advancement perpetuates another one, you know, so every time something happens, it becomes almost like a cheese rolling down a hill, a domino effect, you know, you know, if you develop a new piece of tech, so like, you know, an iPhone, or the computer is a good example, a laptop, with that is the development of lots and lots of different applications that you can then use to fulfill various tasks and processes. And then every time they're developed, that causes some other form of innovation, and so on. So as we get stronger in technology, it by default has a knock-on effect, and this continues to evolve, which is why the spike is so high. And we can see that in this little example here. So this, the Simon is the first ever touchscreen mobile phone, which looks quite prehistoric now. This is from around 1991. And you can imagine walking around with that today would look pretty odd. But back then, this was pretty revolutionary. You know, the whole idea of a mobile phone that was touchscreen and all the things that you could do with it. Of course, the capabilities of that's evolved to in a very short space of time is now essentially our lifelines, which is basically the iPhone or the smartphone, depending on what you use, which is pretty much capable of doing anything now. You can just about run your whole business from a smartphone near enough. You know, perhaps not if you've got massive infrastructure in terms of machinery, but essentially business processes and reaching out to customers and selling, your phone can do just amazing things. And of course, all those other areas that we talked about earlier on, from Netflix and Uber and Airbnb and stuff, all of that culminates from the development of this device. So things are moving quickly, and then it moves on even more, because then we're into things like mixed reality and looking at more immersive experiences. So things like virtual reality, which has actually been around for quite a long time, is now being used far more widely, particularly in industry, for training and for interactivity. You know, so in the medical industry and in oil rigs and aviation and all that kind of stuff, immersive experiences are really playing a massive role in that. So again, we've gone beyond just the telephone, the iPhone or smartphone, and actually moving that into a much more immersive world. And this again is becoming far more prevalent in lots and lots of different sectors. So you can see technology is moving at a huge rate. And then the final part of that is think differently. So the final D, and this is really the key to all of this stuff, the ability to think differently, the ability to challenge the norm and not be too caught up in your own business and look outwards, what is going on out there. And as you can see here, it says all organizations tend to think quite similarly because they employ a certain type of person. Usually they're employing all the same people with the same training, the same background, and it becomes almost a robotic effect. So companies fail to see opportunity because they're not provoking themselves, they're not stimulating themselves, and they're not asking, are we continuing to add value? And to be disruptive, as you can see on the screen here, it comes from the ability to free yourself from your own biases and change the situation that you're in. So again, that keyword, provoking yourself. And this can be shown in two parts. So when we talk about it from a Denix point of view, and we talk about thinking differently, we see innovation in two categories. One is in the incumbent category, those playing not to lose. And that's referring back to those legacy businesses I was talking about earlier on. Those businesses that have been around a long time, they make a lot of money, they've got shareholders to keep happy, they've got to keep the profits coming, they've got a lot of infrastructure. So what they're doing is they're essentially keep doing what they're doing to protect their market share. Essentially, they don't want competitors coming in and they want to maintain what they've got. So it's hard for them to provoke and be bold and think differently about their offer. But this is a dangerous move because on the other side, you've got those playing to win, and these are the disruptors. Typically, these are early startups or younger businesses. And these are people that are coming into the market with new ideas, new ways of doing things, using technology and disrupting the incumbents. And these people typically have nothing to lose because they don't have that massive infrastructure. and they don't have all the staff and all the stuff that goes with that. So they're able to really able to kick in and disrupt what's already in place. And those legacy companies need to be thinking more in this approach. And this quote on the screen here is from a lady called Sophie Hackford from Wired magazine, which is a big tech magazine. And she says, legacy companies have too much to gain from the present to think too much about the future. And ain't that the truth? As I say, they're busy protecting what they've got. And the danger is that they're unable to advance and move forward because they don't want to lose what they've already got. Rob, are you on? So.
Yeah, I am, yeah.
Rob, can you just jump in here just from the Kodak thing? I've just got someone at the door, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so this slide shows Kodak, and we're just talking about legacy companies resting on their laurels. And Kodak's a classic example of that. Obviously, they made an awful lot of money from selling physical film, and never, they basically filed for bankruptcy a few years ago, and the reason for that is because they didn't switch to digital. And the irony of this is actually that Kodak were the first people to develop a digital camera, which they did in the 1970s, but they obviously have the technical wherewithal to be able to do that, which was a great achievement, but they never saw the business impetus to actually commercialize it. And the reason for that is it would effectively kill their main source of income, i.e. selling physical film. Whereas obviously the strategically best thing to have done would be to have launched the digital camera. Here's a picture of the guy, as you can see, in the 1970s. That was the first digital camera, and as we said, that was done by Kodak. I don't know if when you back here, because I haven't got control of the slides. Okay, sorry, I have, yeah. So we're now just going to talk about the anatomy of a digital product. So obviously this webinar is about teaching you about digital, also teaching you about how to develop a digital product. So for people who are not familiar with that, we're just going to describe the anatomy of a digital product. The overall delivery of a digital product consists of storage, which is where the data and information is stored in the products. The back end is really the stuff that you don't see, how the product works, and the front end is the piece that you interact with. So we can think of a digital product in these three senses, and overall delivering them together gives you the digital product. Now, if you think about that, sorry, I'm struggling to move the slides in the right direction. If we think about this as the analogy of a car, so storage is effectively the fuel, what makes the car drive. So that's, you know, the sort of the back end, as we said in digital products. The back end of a car are the bits and pieces you don't see, so the chassis, the engine, the heating system, etc. But fundamentally how it works, but you don't see that unless you have to fix it. And then the front end is the experience of using that product. So obviously with a car, we look at brands and colours, how nice does it look and how does it make us feel. That's all about the desirability of the product. And then the user experience is the inside of the car, what it's like to use it, and obviously that how you actually drive the car. So we can see the parallel of a digital product and look at it, how it's overlaid with a physical product. I think Wayne's back now. There.
Sorry, Rob, sorry. The typical of working from home. Sorry to just drop you in it there. Apologies there. Knocking on the door. Okay, yeah. So that's a little bit about the sort of the 3Ds, how to be disruptive, embrace digital, think differently. A little bit of foundation of why that's important. The next stage really is then identifying why we're doing this and identifying your consumer needs and where you'll be adding value, and this is really important. And as you can see here, the digital landscape is noisy. There's lots and lots of applications out there, lots and lots of digital products out there, and it's really hard to cut through the noise. And the danger is just to be digital for the sake of being digital. There's no point in just releasing a random app or whatever for the sake of doing it. It needs to add value and really cut through. And you can see this in this little formula that Adenica put together here, which kind of gives a good description of that, which is if you can identify the consumer need, meet it with a form of digital innovation, and then try and get early adoption for it, that's going to lead to a successful digital delivery. And we'll go through all three of those areas. But really, you know, the first point is really understanding what the consumer needs and why, you know, where the value is added. So we break these into our 5 E's, we call it. So ease, entertainment, economic, education, and ecosystem. And if we go through each of those in turn, so in terms of ease, the product or the service, that it needs to be more efficient for the user. It needs to make things easier for them. It could be involved in some form of automation. It could be added functionality to give them better control. It might be making it a more future friendly UX design, so better to use and nicer to use. But something that makes their life easier in some way, that's a really important part. Entertainment. So it's not always just about entertainment in the traditional sense as we think about entertainment, but and the product needs to add an element of excitement. You've got to want to use it and be part of it. And this could be provided by the platform itself, or the platform could facilitate some form of enjoyment that comes from it. Economic, well, that's a big part of it. You know, cheaper, obviously, the cheaper cost, the better value for money, or if it offers alternative payment methods like subscription models or different ways for paying for the product, then the more rich of that offer, the more opportunity there is for it to be adopted. Education, does it provide new information? Does it provide access to data? Does it gamify things? Does it enable the user to make more informed decisions or gain new knowledge from it? And this is a big part of what's happening in digital development now, the ability to access new knowledge and learn new things. And ecosystem, this is another really important one. Does it integrate with existing systems or products and form part of a digital ecosystem? So, you know, if you're a Mac user and you use a lot of Apple products, the chances are if you've got a Mac, then you probably got an iPhone and you probably use an Apple Watch. And you use all those things that are within that ecosystem. And the reason you do it is because they integrate together and they work seamlessly. And that's something clever that Apple have really rolled out and got down to a T. So this is a key part of it. Does it integrate with things? If it's going to be a stumbling block to adopt, then it's going to be harder for users to get on board with it. And if you can get a combination of all those things, or at least some of those E's, then you know you're on the right track. The next part of that would be then the types of digital innovation, and there's lots of different types. So these that I'm going to suggest are just examples. But you might look at things like automation, and a good example of that would be something like online accounting, so things like Xero or QuickBooks or whatever. You know, taking the manual process out of what is quite a laborious task and allowing the software to do a lot of the work for you. Automation, no doubt, in things like Xero really has changed the way that companies are able to manage their finance and easily deal with tax and transactions, etc. Another good example of automation is an app called Babylon, which is essentially an online GP service that you access through your smartphone. And this is enabled to, it triages your symptoms through its AI to understand the sort of things that might be wrong with you and suggest solutions and medications and stuff. But actually, if you then need to speak to a GP based on its triaging, it can then connect you via your video phone. And this is a really good piece of automation. It takes all the difficulties that are involved with trying to book a doctor's appointment and make time to see a GP, etc. So it's a really good example. Information and gamification. This is a big one. Gamification plays a huge role in the technology and the products that are released these days. A good example is many of us have probably got Fitbits or Apple Watches or something. And really, this just provides information to you. It doesn't really do a lot as such. It just provides you with the data to inform you to then make better choices. You know, so the data might be your weight, your steps, your heart rate, whatever that might be. And then you can use that information to then change to improve them. So it's actually just providing access to data and gamifying it to some extent. So if you use things like Strava or anything like that, it's a really good example of adding an element of competition to fitness. But you can also use gamification in like things like sales leaderboards, like this example here. You know, if you're trying to get almost create an element of competition within the sales team, for example, and turn it into almost like a game or a scorecard. This is a really good way of this being used. And you can apply this to lots of different concepts and ideas. Integration, as I talked about earlier on, this is another good area of innovation, you know, being able to integrate lots of different things so they work seamlessly together. We see that a lot in smart homes now, and being able to connect the lights and devices and timers and all that kind of stuff. But you can do that a lot in the business as well, integrating lots of different processes and operations so they all seamlessly work together and make the process more streamlined and easier to use. And a good example here is this Automatic, which is a product that is developed, I think it's a US company, I can't recall. Jamie, I don't know if you're on, but I think it's a US company.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and this is a product that you can plug into essentially a car, and it collects all of the data that your car produces in terms of technology data and analytics and its performance, etc. And then feeds that back to an app in your phone, and essentially enables you to see the way that your car is performing. And obviously, you can take preventative action in terms of like the functionality of the car, how much you're using it, or if there's any risk of breakdown and all that kind of stuff. You know, so it's just providing you with information that you can then use to make choices. Personalization, this is a strong one, you know. If lots of different people are adopting your products or service, then being able to personalize it is a great way to innovate. And a very famous example is Netflix. So everyone, when you go on Netflix, if you do use it, you'll find that you have to create a user account or a profile. And it provides you with things that you might like based on what you've watched previously. Well, what's interesting about Netflix is when they show you the images on the screen of the different programs that are available, they adapt the type of image they show you to get a reaction from you based on what you might like. So if you typically watch quite dark, gritty stuff, for example, then the images that they show for certain programs will be tailored and more visually reflective of that, because they think that's what you're going to be pulled towards. So each program will maybe have 5 or 6 different cover photos, and you'll receive the one that's most relevant to what you think you might like. So that's a really nice form of personalization. And communication and productivity. So again, we're working from home this last year, we'll have seen a lot of this, but using tools to streamline this process. Slack is a really good example, a very famous example of getting teams to be able to work together and collaborate and share. But there's lots of other tools out there that do this. And again, it's taking the difficulty in the process of working together out of it and streamlining it so that teams can better integrate, and there isn't such reliance on having big infrastructure in place to do that. And we touched upon it earlier on, virtualization. So using rich media, mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality to provide experiences. So you see this person here is working on a medical operation, and they're able to do that through a virtual experience, and it doesn't need to be the big infrastructure or them working on real life cases. And they can really get into the training and collaboration, sharing an experience of learning how to experience or train into something using something like mixed reality. So these are all really good forms of innovation that you can consider. And again, they can be applied to lots and lots of different applications. So what else is out there? Well, things like understanding what people are looking for. So search terms, things like if you go to Google and you use this trends.google.com, which I highly recommend you check out, you can search pretty much any search term or topic and see what the appetite is for it, how many people are searching for it, how often, in what part of the world, what sort of words are they using. This is a really a good way and a free way to just gauge if what your new products or service offer has any legs to it in terms of, are people looking for this? And it's definitely something just to give you some baseline data. And then there's really great sites like Product Hunt, where lots of new innovations are launched, and a lot of big players are using these sites now to kind of trial out and test some of their new offers. And you can go on here and you can see what's trending and the sort of things, the hot topics that are out there, the hot tech that's out, and the new solutions that people are producing. Engage to see, you know, is what your offer is your offer relevant in there, and is it cutting the mustard, so to speak, in terms of what the desire is. So posting something on Product Hunt is a really good way to get strong feedback, and see if it again, if your new service or product offer has any legs to it. Crowdfunding sites, things like Kickstarter, are really great as well, because they're a good way to put out a baseline product, so a minimal viable product, you know, for people to early adopt and just buy into, and they can do that by essentially sponsoring it, you know, contributing and donating some money for the development of the product, and in return they get access to some of the key features, or some sort of reward for being part of its development, funding its development. And Kickstarter is great, because if nobody spends any money on it and nobody gets involved in it, then you know that it's not cutting through. So this is another great way to try and get some funding for new development, especially if it's a consumer product, but two, to gauge the reaction to it and see if it has any weight with the audience out there. And then there's some great magazines and online publications to look at. Wired Magazine, Tech Insider, T3. There's lots of stuff out there. If you just Google, you know, tech publications, you'll see lots of them. But these provide just a really good stimulus for what's happening in tech world and what's happening out in the real world in terms of new developments and new solutions to problems. And again, it comes down to that thing, provoking solutions to problems. Where do you add value? And if you're going to be developing new product or a new service and evolving what your company does, where does it add value to the user? So all of the aforementioned slides really refer to just good stimulus points to be checking out to see what's happening out there in the world. And then at the end of that formula, as I say, find early adopters. If you can use some of these platforms and you can get people engaged in your new service or your new product quite early, then you've got more chance of it being adopted more widely. You need to really get people engaged in it quite early on, and at that very early stage. And if you're fighting too hard for that to happen, then it's probable that it's not really cutting through. So, you know, really doing your research and looking at, again, where it's adding real value and where there's an appetite is really important. The earlier that people adopt and buy into your concept, the more the likelihood of it having success. And it goes back to that formula that I said at the start. So the consumer needs, so the 5 E's, where does it add value at, you know, and where is it, what consumer need is it addressing? Digital innovation, what type of innovation is it using, i.e. automation or virtualization or et cetera, and early adoption, are people buying into it? If you can get those 3 segments together and get them working together, then you've got a chance of a good, successful delivery of a new product or service. And then we move on to the next bit. I'll hand over to Rob for this bit, but this is a really key area to consider, which is how do you then determine what type of product or service you need to then be developing within your organization, and you know, what is informing that development? And that really comes down to 2 key things, which is stimulus and insight. And those 2 things working together are really going to be the thing that gives you the upper hand to drive your new offer forward. So Rob, I'll hand over to you for this bit.
Okay, thanks Wayne. So if you've listened to what Wayne said so far, we know innovation is important. We know that people want to be disrupted or risk being disruptive. We know that digital is important. We know that thinking differently is important. So if you want to engage in innovation, the first thing you must do is generate your own stimulus and insight, which is fundamentally about understanding your market, understanding what unmet needs there are, and understanding where the problems exist. And here's a famous Einstein quote that reflects that perfectly. He said, if I had an hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. So in other words, it's really important to understand your problem before you think about the solution. Otherwise, you find yourself fixing the wrong thing or not fixing the real issue that's wrong with something. In other words, if you understand the problem, the solution often becomes very, very obvious. So as an innovator or a company or a business who wants to do new things, you have to understand how to generate your own stimulus and insight. That's fundamentally what we're saying here. Here I'm trying to flex the slides over again. Thanks, Wayne. Sorry. I don't know if that's me doing it as well. Okay, so right. Sorry, I think Wayne and I are both flicking through the slides here. But so what is stimulus and insight? So we think of stimulus as the more tangible thing. So really think of stimulus as the fuel for ideas. And really, stimulus comes from all sorts of things. So it would be things like interesting technologies, new manufacturing process, what competitors are doing. So kind of like technological and tangible things. And basically, if you work in a sector, you'll be aware of lots of different technologies, new business models, new things that are happening, things that competitors are doing. And this is just like loads of pieces of the jigsaw that are floating in front of your mind, and you can pull those together to come up with new ideas. So that's one thought, that's stimulus. So what's insight? Insight is more about the market, and it's about identifying your customer, finding out what they need, and understanding what problems that they have, and really empathizing with them. And the point we're trying to make here is that stimulus is a bit more tangible, and insight is more about understanding and empathizing with your customer and your market. And if you can bring the two together, that's where the best innovation happens. So we think of stimulus as fuel for the ideas. Insight is what the spark that sets that idea on fire. Just click on to the next slide, please, Wayne. Thank you. And just to think about it in a bit more different, in a slightly different way, repeating what we just said, but stimulus really is highly tangible. There's technology, trends, publications, competitor, regulatory changes, etc., etc. So they're very tangible things that you would get from being an expert in your sector and being a subject matter expert. Insight is much more about understanding the customer, understanding people, and you can get insight by spending time with your customer. And getting close to them. So go to where they buy your products, where they use your products, and where they talk about your products. And that's how you generate insight. So a really good example of that would be if you were doing a product for, just go back, wait, sorry. If you're doing a product for a baby product or a product aimed at parents, then go to something like Mum's Net. So even as a man who doesn't have children, you can get a lot of insight about what pregnant women or people with young children, specifically women, are thinking about in terms of their needs for women's products and children's products. So it's a really good source of insight. If you go to the next slide, Wayne, just give you a little bit of a tool here. So really, we can think of stimulus and insight occurring in 4 different areas. So what's consumer relevant? So in other words, the people that buy or use your product, what do they want, and what are their trends, and what new things do they want? Another thing to think about is the market. So how is the market changing? Is it going cashless? Is it going to e-commerce? Is the market going into new geographies? Are there new ways of accessing the market? We think about the future. So what things can we do what's going to come down the line that's going to affect our business? So it could be about sustainability. It could be about new attitudes to social interactions post-COVID. So thinking about the future, then finally thinking about technology. So what technology can I use in my industry? What's being used today? What do we know that's coming in the future from looking at patents and going to conferences? What technology is being used in parallel industries that we could bring into our industry? So we can think about stimulus and insight in these 4 different areas. We're now just going to show you something we call stimulus and insight canvas. So if you work in an organization or a team, you can use this canvas to generate stimulus and insight, either internally, or you can do it externally with colleagues or customers even. But you can print this off, put it on the wall in an office, and put a problem in there. So if you had a problem, so say if you work for, let's take a local example, if you work for Reckitt Benckiser and you wanted to come up with a faster headache tablet for Nurofen, you could put in the middle, we need to develop a new faster headache tablet for the Nurofen. So that would be a problem. Then you put that up in the business, and then you would get people to put ideas and put post-it notes on here, or write it physically, or do it electronically. So what does the customer want from a headache tablet? They probably want it to be fast, they probably want it to be effective. So you can have your colleagues putting that kind of insight in there. You could put stuff that's happening in the market, because you could see, well, Panadol have done this, or I've seen a new technology that's using an electronic device to address headaches. So you can put some stuff in there. You could look at technology, so you could look at things like, I've seen an app for migraine products, so people are using migraine trackers to deal with headache. And in the future, well, what could happen in the future? There may be a future where we use genomics to assess our risk for headache and avoid triggers, so we can get rid of headaches completely. So you can basically use these kind of canvases to generate your own stimulus and insight around a given topic. The real key with stimulus and insight is about going beyond the obvious. So it's really easy to get the received wisdom. If you go to the usual sources to generate stimulus and insight, you'll be just generating the same insight and stimulus that all of your competitors are doing. So we all go to the same trade conferences, we all read the same journals, we all look at the same competitors. So it's really easy to get that stimulus and insight, but the best prizes are there for the people who can go beyond the obvious sources, because that will generate more novel stimulus and insight and lead you to newer ideas. So classically, when you think about the customer, people do market research and they're run by the usual agencies. Actually, you could just go and stand in Tesco and speak to live customers in a much more genuine way to get proper insight. And so there's lots of ways of doing that. And just to give you an example of a product that was generated using good stimulus and insight, the Dyson DC01, which was must be over 20 years old now, I would imagine, but that Hoover, that vacuum cleaner was a technological product, but it was based on insight. So obviously Dyson are a very competent engineering firm, high degree of credibility in science. So we think of it as a very technological product, but actually they developed that product based on insight because they understood what it was like to do the vacuum cleaning, and they understood where the insights were. So the technical side of it is the stimulus. So they used something they call vortex technology. It was bagless. They used filters not to put dust back into the atmosphere. It was strong so it didn't break, and they used new materials. So that was like the technical stuff, but that didn't lead them to what was novel about this product. What was novel was the insight that they had. So they knew that the biggest problem with using a vacuum cleaner in the old days was the vacuum cleaner would lose suction, and you wouldn't know why. And the reason why it lost suction was because the bag was full, but you couldn't see the bag was full because it was hidden in the guts of the machine. So what they did, that insight led them to create the clear chamber, so you could literally see when it needed emptying, so you didn't lose power basically. But that also gave the customer a really good visual cue that the product was working. So the first time that they vacuumed their floor, they saw loads of dust in the clear bag. So it started to make the customer start to feel this was a really effective product because they could see the results that they had. Some of the other insights that they had was that people were found it difficult to empty the bag. So they did the whole thing where you just pull out the Perspex container and tip it straight to the bin, so it's mess free. The other insight they had is people were losing the tools on their vacuum cleaners. So Dyson made a really simple, this is where the tool sits. There were tools that clicked together, there were places to put the tools, and it was robust, so you never lost it. And really the final piece of insight was they knew that it was difficult to clean the stairs. So they looked at how do we make a product that's more easy to clean the stairs, and came up with a fairly obvious solution, which is basically make a handle that you can extend up the stairs with a flexible hose. So you can see that what at first sight looks like a very technical product was actually led by insight, and that has been subsequently very, very successful. Okay, we're just going to quickly cover the sprint process, which if you're going to innovate and it's good to apply a process. So applying a process to innovation is not an oxymoron. A process is not there to hold you back and stifle creativity. It's there as a checkpoint to make sure you do good quality innovation. And this is what we call an innovation sprint. And the reason why we call it a sprint is because you can actually do it very, very quickly. It's a 5-step process. You could do each step on a day. So you can do a 5-day innovation sprint, spend lots of time. But equally, you can just get together for a couple of hours over at lunchtime and do the 5 steps. So it's a good way to rapidly come up with new ideas and iterate things. So the first step of the innovation sprint is what we call a download. So whatever the topic of the innovation is, you basically download information to people. So if you were a car manufacturer and you wanted to look at electric vehicles, then you would give everyone a download about electric vehicles. So it would be about sustainability, the environmental crisis, battery technology, charging infrastructure, talking to consumers about range anxiety, all of those kind of things. You would basically spend some time talking about the problems and the technology and the insight around it, and basically using stimulus and insight to give everyone information on the topic area. So you're bringing everyone up to the same level of knowledge. And once you've given everyone that information on the topic, then you run an ideation session. So you basically use the group to come up with ideas, and basically use the stimulus and insight that you shared in the download to come up with new ideas that address the challenge that you're trying to solve, and you would come up with loads of ideas. And at that point, you might have 10 ideas, you might have 100 ideas, you might have 1,000 ideas. So you need a way of thinning that down. So you do a selection process, and selection is traditionally done very, very poorly. Usually in an organisation, it's the most powerful person or the boss who decides which idea is progressed, or people conform to what the leaders in the room think are the good ideas. But really, you should have a selection done in a much more scientific way. So the best way to do it would be to come up with some form of selection matrix, maybe a very simple 3-point selection matrix, like how feasible is the idea, how much will it cost us to deliver, and what's the benefit it delivers, and score each idea high, medium and low, or 1, 3 and 5, or 1 to 10, or whatever scoring system you come up with, and score each idea and then choose the one that scored the highest. There are simpler ways of doing this. If you create lots of physical material and post-its around the room, you could just get people to give each person 5 votes and put a tick on the idea they like, and do it in a voting way like that. But fundamentally, have some form of selection criteria that does justice to the idea and gives you some data to show that you've chosen the right idea. And once you've chosen the idea to progress, you move to prototype. So the idea of prototype is not necessarily to physically build a product, which is often what we think about with prototyping, but if you can do that, great. Often you wouldn't be able to. But all you want to do is create a demo of the idea that conveys the concept to the audience that you want to test it with. So that could be done very adequately with a piece of flip chart. You just draw the idea, maybe draw the consumer journey, just some kind of representation of what that idea is. And then finally, you test that prototype. And we tend to think of testing as market research that costs lots of money and takes a long time to do. But with the sprint process, we want to do that in a much more agile way. So just test it with a handful of people just to see what they think of your prototype, and create live user interactions. So in other words, socialize your prototype with groups of people. And we would suggest that you use 3 types of people. So one would be users or customers, so the people who would buy or use that product, and see what they think about it. Second thing would be use internal experts to look at the feasibility of the idea. So it might be your legal guys, your regulatory guys, your medical guys, whatever business you're in. Ask them what they think of the idea and make sure they're in a showstoppers for it. And finally, ask stakeholders in your business, so budget holders, bosses, just to check that they're cool with the idea. And then you would get a go or a no-go decision. And if it's go, then off you go and launch the product. If it's no-go, you can actually go back and rework. So it may be that you tested the idea and they wanted it to be red instead of green. So you go back and create a prototype that's red, not green. So you can just go back one step. Or it might be that you actually had some feedback in your test, and they were saying that a better idea would be something else, and that might have been something else that was in your matrix that you just didn't select it. So you could go back to selection, select another idea that meets the problem, and then move forward. So in other words, it's an iterative process. So just because something might not test well, you can always go back and improve its chances of succeeding in the process. Obviously, don't spend forever pushing the same idea through the process. There's always a time to call it quits, but just trying to give you like an agile way of doing this. Yeah, and so don't see launch as the end point of your products. There's lots more you can do when you launch a product. So when you have a product and you've launched it, then there are lots you can do with it. So it could be about how you advertise it. It could be about how you iterate it, etc. So I think that's it, Wayne, yeah?
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to flip the camera on. Thanks for that. Okay, folks, yeah, so that's a general overview, really, of developing new products and services. Obviously, we can go into like a lot more detail on some of this stuff, but given the time we've got, we're kind of just trying to give you a top-level view of it. But fundamentally, The key points from this really are, firstly, you need to be continuously innovating. You need to be continuously provoking the business. If you're not provoking the business, then you're standing still and other people will come into that marketplace. And it can be something as small. We always say, you know, if you run a pet shop on a high street and someone opens a pet shop next door, then that's a form of disruption. And you've got to ask yourself, how does your pet shop continue to add value versus the neighbor? You know, so, I mean, you could apply this thought process to a business, whether you're a one-person business working from home or you're a multinational conglomerate. You know, it's a thought process that really counts. And really, it's about the ability to look outwards and see what's happening in the technology world, look at your own value and say, how are we still adding value and where can we continue to evolve this and where can technology play a role in that? And continuously be moving, and then use something like the sprint process that Rob's just described there to try and quickly test new ideas and, you know, get your teams together, whether that's a couple of you or 100 of you, you know, and really make it part of the culture of the business to continuously trial things. Ask that question, use some stimulus and insight to try and inform the, you know, the ideas that come out of it, and then really develop, just continuously develop ideas, select some ideas and then trial little basic ideas. Be bold, be agile, try it out. It's okay to fail. If it doesn't go well, roll back up the cycle and try another approach. But make sure that you are moving. This is really the key point in this. And then making sure that when you are developing a product or a service, and if you are using digital to do that, making sure that it has a purpose to it. So remember, go back to that 5 E's. What consumer needs does it fulfill? How is it going to help them? How is it going to aid them to adopt? And it also, bear in mind, it's not just about the outward facing, so what it means to the consumer directly. It might be something that you develop, so a new product or a new service. It might be a new process that you develop internally to make the business function better or quicker or cheaper or more streamlined, or offer an additional service or whatever it might be. That then by default has a knock-on effect to the customer because it makes their lives better through interacting with your company. So it doesn't always have to just be a product that you're giving directly outwards. It might be innovation that you're doing inwards. And therefore making your company more agile and putting it in a better position, and therefore the knock-on effects is to the consumer. So you can look at it in lots of different ways, but really the key is to keep shifting on there. As I said at the start of the process, this webinar is part of a series of events that the Growth Hub put on, all of them covering all different topics of all different areas that you can imagine, ultimately to help businesses thrive. The next webinar, similar to this one, I'll just put this on, is on the 26th of May, which is all about business automation. And we talked about that in today's session, how to automate and explore automation to streamline things and get things working together. So there's a whole session on this about claiming back your time and reducing the need for laborious tasks, etc. Automation can do wonderful things in business, and it can do wonderful things for your consumer, and it's definitely worth checking that out. But also this, it was a little bit of a stimulus for a series of masterclasses that were Adenica delivering for the Growth Hub in the Humber area. And the first masterclass starts this Friday. And then they're weekly after that. There's 3 in the series. They all fall on a Friday. And really the masterclasses are focused on how to develop standout products and services using technology. So we'll really get into the guts of kind of what we've been talking about today, and actually run through some of the actual processes and methodologies and tools that you can use to develop new digital innovation within your business. These are free to attend. They're about 2 hours long, and we invite you to take part, and we get into a little bit more detail. It's a little bit more interactive, less of a webinar and more of a working together and doing some tasks and trialing things out. So we invite you to take part. If you go to the Grow My SME website, you can sign up to that. And all the links will be on there for you to sign up. But it's a really good way if you want to find out more about what we've talked about today and actually put that into some form of action and apply it to your business. These masterclasses would be a good place to start. And then the wider support that's available is a program called Digital Catalyst. And this is essentially one-to-one support where consultants like Adenic, and there's lots of other consultants involved in it, will come and work with your business directly on a one-to-one basis, and help you move your business forward with a particular focus, again, on using digital technology to do that. So that might be developing new opportunities for the business, opening new markets, new products, reaching out to new audiences, whatever it might be, or it might be addressing pain points, streamlining the business, reducing costs, developing the culture within the business. I mean, anything you can imagine, it can pretty much cover it. And every business is unique. So it is one-to-one, it is bespoke, and we'll explore what the challenges are or what the opportunities are, and then how can technology make a difference and give you a roadmap to move that forward. So it kind of looks like this in terms of format, the digital catalyst. It starts with a digital assessment, where we'll do a digital maturity assessment with the business and try and understand where you are now. How do you explore digital technology? Do you use it in your operations? Do you use it in your products? Are you fearful of digital? Are you an early adopter? These are all things to establish. Then the results of this digital assessment then lead to what will happen in essentially a workshop, and we'll offer you direct one-to-one support using the results of the digital assessment and the conversations we've had with you at that point to understand your business, to then work through ideas and concepts and new ways to think about what it is that you're doing and what role technology could play in that, and we'll help you guide you through that. Then that links to an action plan where we'll give you essentially a way that you can drive that forward. So we'll give you the information and then say, look, this is what we think you could be doing. This is where you think we could take it. There's some brokerage, so we'll be able to link you to additional support that's available. That might be training, that might be funding, or that might be technology providers that can facilitate some of the new things that you want to develop. So it's not kind of leaving you high and dry. We'll take you through the process and then give you a roadmap to get out of it. So some example projects that you might see in the digital catalyst, and as you can see, they're far from exhaustive because you could go on forever with them, but basic examples we could explore digital marketing. It might be about moving operations into the cloud, consolidating your infrastructure, providing you with new tools and applications for productivity. It might be in adding an e-commerce element to the business, exploring how secure you are with cybersecurity, online accounting, relationship management, etc., etc. It goes on and on and on. But ultimately what we're trying to do is get you to work more efficiently, more effectively, develop new products and services, enhance your customer offer, provoke the business, again, that word, provoke the business, and help you to grow. The whole point of this is to help you to grow and develop and make sure that you're future-proofed and agile so that you can continuously evolve as the commercial and technological landscape is evolving. And that's really what these are all about. But it's essentially a bit of hand-holding, so an outside perspective to come and help you move forward and help you find solutions to keep the business thriving. It's open to, if you're an SME in the Humber region, you pretty much qualify. There's the criteria there on the screen. If you qualify as an SME, then you pretty much qualify for this. There are some minor restrictions, but for the most part, it's fine. And if you can just submit an application. Now, so contact details on the screen there if you want to get involved, or basically if you go to the Grow My SME website, so growmysme.co.uk, all of these initiatives are on there. So Digital Catalyst, the masterclasses that I spoke about, the webinars, all of that support is on there. If you look under the ICT for growth, then you'll find all of that information. But Grow My SME is a great tool for you to refer back to. If you're a business and you're looking for support and looking how to develop, all of these initiatives are part of that project. So I'd highly recommend you try that. Having said all of that, Digital Catalyst at the moment is fully subscribed. Because a lot of people took it up when it came around in the first bout. However, there's an extension in the pipeline, and they're about to roll out an extension to the project. So it is still worth expressing your interest, because when they open that up, you'll be in the queue, and we can, if you fulfill the criteria, which if you're an SME, then you probably will, then you'll be ready to go, and when it rolls out, you'll be assigned a consultant to come and work with you. And that's it really in a nutshell. As I said, all of that support, grants and investment, one-to-one business support, mentoring support, training, all of that stuff is on the Grow My SME website. You can see the link there, growmysme.co.uk. Go check that out. Before we move on, are there any questions or any comments or anything anybody wants to add? We've got a few minutes left, so we're happy to answer. Or if you've got anything specific related to your business that you'd like us to elaborate on based on what we've talked about today and relating it to your own business, you can speak to us about that now. If you want to turn your mic on or type in the chat, we've got a few minutes. If not, it's looking pretty quiet, so that's fine. If not, what I'll do is I'll leave the contact details on the screen. So for those that are interested in taking part in some of these processes, you can see the details there. I'll leave them on the screen for the next few minutes. You know, if you want to register, then feel free.